Hello, this is cjhoyle, and in this video I'm going to attempt to repair this discarded window air conditioning unit that I found in my neighborhood sitting on the curb in front of someone's house. So after bringing it home, I plugged it into the wall, and I was able to confirm that it seems to be working, in that after a few minutes I can definitely feel air coming out of the front that feels colder than room temperature, and the condenser coil on the back after a few minutes definitely feels like it's getting hot. But this unit does still have a problem, and it's likely the reason that the previous owner decided to get rid of it. So I can demo this by turning the unit on by pressing the power button here. And as you can hear, after a second or so, it fires up, and if I wait long enough, I should be able to feel cold air coming out up here. But there's a bunch of other buttons on this display panel, so if I press the fan speed button, you can see that it cycles between a couple of different fan speed modes. But there's also a timer and a mode button. But those buttons don't seem to work anymore. With the mode select, I should be able to pick between these three different settings here, and it doesn't seem to do anything. The energy saver seems to work some of the time. Right now it's working. But the temperature up and down buttons, those ones are really flaky. So right now it's set in at 21 degrees Celsius, but if I want to go down, doesn't seem to want to go down. The temperature up button, it seems to work if I press it harder, but then of course I can't go back down again. So I'm certainly no refrigeration technician, and if something went wrong on the refrigeration side of this unit, I definitely wouldn't have the tools or knowledge to be able to fix it. But this control panel should just be low voltage electronics, and I think the problem that it has should be really easy to fix. But this is still an appliance that draws a fair bit of current, and I'm expecting that somewhere inside this unit there should be at least one large capacitor that could be still holding its charge. So even with this thing unplugged, there are definitely dangers to be aware of inside this box, and if you don't have experience and feel comfortable with this sort of thing, then you definitely shouldn't copy what I'm doing in this video. So after unplugging the unit from the wall, I'll start by removing this front bezel here. And so that now gives me a lot better access to this front panel here, and it looks like if I press on these tabs, I should hopefully be able to remove it. So on the back of this control panel, there's a circuit board, and that connects to the rest of the unit via this ribbon cable, and I can see that by trying to pull on this, I've actually unplugged the other end of this ribbon cable. So that means that unfortunately, even though I was trying to avoid it, I am still probably going to have to open up this unit to be able to plug that back in. But now with this removed from the air conditioner, on the back here you can see that each of the switches is labeled. And so what I've been doing now is pressing on each button and then using my multimeter to measure the resistance across each of the terminals. And what I've been finding is that the switches that worked, like for example the on-off button, I'm getting a really low resistance reading, like in the range of about 5 ohms, where the ones that didn't work, like the timer and the mode, those are giving me like 1 mega ohm, like a huge number in comparison. So I'm pretty confident that the problem is the switches themselves on this circuit board. I'm now going to remove these 3 screws so I can hopefully remove this circuit board and take a closer look at those switches. So there's a closer look at what those momentary switches look like, and it could be possible the problem could just simply be that the switches are dirty, and maybe there would be a way to fix it simply by cleaning them with some kind of a chemical. But if I did that, it's possible that the problem can come back again in the future, so I'd rather just replace them with different switches. So I have this bin full of old circuit boards, which I've saved from various different devices over the years. And when I'm doing a repair like this, I always like to start by going through here to see if I can find a component which is similar to what I'm looking for, rather than having to buy a new one. So there's a lot of devices in here that have switches, and you can see this one, for example, looks kind of similar to what we need. But I haven't actually been able to find anything in this bin which is directly compatible with what I need. And the main difference is that most momentary switches tend to have 4 legs on them, like you can see here, where the switches that I need only have 2 legs each. And you could also see that they stick up quite a bit higher than the other example I showed. Now I imagine it would probably be possible for me to take switches like this and modify them to make them fit on this board here. But after taking some measurements of these switches and looking online, I found that there's direct replacements available and they weren't too expensive, so I've ordered a pack of 20 of them, and I'm going to use these switches to replace all the switches on this board, even the ones that are still working, because I'm sure if some of them have failed already, the ones that are still working probably will fail in the future too. But before I do that, there's one quick little test that I want to do just to be doubly sure that the problem actually is these switches themselves. And so what I'm going to do is plug this ribbon cable back into the air conditioner. And I know I'm not going to be able to do that through this small little hole here. So I'm actually going to have to remove the entire cover to be able to get access to the connector, which is buried deep inside of there. So with that cover removed, you can now see down here at the bottom, that white connector is where the ribbon cable connects. And of course, that's not very far from where this large capacitor is. And you can see that some of the terminals at the end of there are exposed. So I'm going to be really careful when I'm reaching my hands inside there. All right, so as you can see, I've got that ribbon cable connected back up. And I've actually got the unit plugged back into the wall, which of course that's dangerous to do because all this stuff up here, it could be dangerous. So I'm not going to touch any of that stuff. I'm only going to be touching stuff on the circuit board. And what I want to try is just to simply press on the button to power it on, but to basically test and make sure that these other features are working and that the problem is actually just the switch. I'll just flip the board over and I should be able to just use a piece of metal and bridge the connections for the button like timer and mode, and that should activate those features even though the buttons for them are not working. After a second or so, we can hear it's fired up. And so I'm going to test the mode button here. You can see there's 3 different LEDs here and it should be switching between those, but as we saw before, when I tap on that button, nothing happens. So I'm going to try flipping it over. And I'm going to use a slotted screwdriver and I'm going to bridge the 2 connections here that say mode. So we'll give that a try. You can hear it made a noise. And you can see we've gone from LED number 1 to now we're on LED number 2. Let's try it again. And there you go. Now we've moved to LED number 5. And of course, with changing the modes, of course, different things are happening inside the air conditioning unit. So it looks like, yeah, truly the reason we don't have access to mode is because the switch that normally will bridge those 2 connections is not working. So off camera, I'll repeat those same checks, but for the other buttons as well. All right, so I've got all my tools assembled here, and I'm going to start by removing all of the switches from the board. And the way that I'm going to do that basically is heat up both legs of the switch, sort of one at a time, and then from the other side, I'm going to hold onto the switch, and I'm going to kind of rock it back and forth to be able to get it out as I'm sort of alternating between heating each side. All right, so there's that first switch, which has been removed, and that came out pretty easily. Here is a comparison to the brand new switch that I got to replace it. They're very similar to one another. The new one looks like it's actually just a tiny little bit shorter. I don't think that'll really be a problem. It's like, it looks like a lot, when we're zoomed in this much, but it's only like a fraction of a millimeter. If it does pose a problem, I could always just add a little dot of epoxy to the end of each of these to bring them up to their full length, but I don't think that'll be necessary. All right, so I've now got all 7 switches successfully removed, and you can see that I can now take the new switches and I should be able to slot them into the holes left by the old ones like that. But some of the holes are plugged with solder just based on the way that they came out. Some of them came out easier than others, and so this one, for example, I'm not actually able to get that in there. And again, the reason is just because there's too much solder plugging those holes right now. So that's where the solder wick comes in. I can use that to soak up some of that solder and clear out those holes so I'll be able to install the new switches. After trying a few, I found that I actually don't even seem to need the solder wick. I can actually just sort of put my soldering iron on the end there and I can kind of just drag it out of the hole, and that leaves a good enough hole that the new legs of the switch should be able to fit through. And like you can see, those are able to go through there quite easily without a problem. All right, so I got all those holes cleared out now, and I've actually got one switch already installed in there. So I just stuck it through the holes and then I bent the legs of the switch outwards like that, just to hold it in place while I'm soldering it. And then afterwards, of course, I will clip those off. So I'll do the same with all the other switches. We'll do the fan speed one here next. All right, so I've now got all those switches in place, and I'm just going to apply a little bit of flux to each of the different spots where I'm going to be soldering each of those joints where the switch comes through the hole. This will help the solder flow better, making a good connection. Now I'll apply some fresh solder to the end of my soldering iron here. Then I'll go around and I'll solder each of these connections. Now I can clip off these extra ends using my side cutters. And then finally I'll clean off the flux that got onto the board with some isopropyl alcohol using a toothbrush. Alright, so I've now got the circuit board temporarily plugged back into the air conditioner because I want to do a quick test to it before I reassemble everything. So I actually have the unit plugged into the wall again. And we'll go ahead and we'll try it. So I press the power button to turn it on. And we'll just now go through all the other buttons and just make sure that they're working. So yeah, the fan speed is working again. We've got the timer button now. That one's now working. We've got the mode select button, which will switch between the different LEDs here. And that's working perfectly. This button here is that energy saver button. That's working. And of course the up or the down and the up. Those are both working correctly. So that means all my soldering work was successful and I can reassemble the circuit board back into the unit. Alright, so I've now got everything fully put back together again and plugged into the wall. So we can do one final test. As you can see, it turns on and all the buttons work. And even though the switches that I use are a little bit shorter than the originals, it doesn't matter. I mean, they're really only a fraction of a millimeter smaller anyway, so I'm not at all surprised that I didn't have to do anything to modify them. Now, in the process of doing this, I realized there may have been a simpler solution to this problem, because next to the numbers here, you can see this box, and behind that box, there's an infrared sensor, which is designed for a separate remote control that can work with this. Now, I don't have the remote that originally came with this one, but I imagine it may have been possible to buy one. And of course, if I had the remote, then I wouldn't need to worry about the buttons on here not working. But I really can't imagine that remote control would have been anywhere near as inexpensive as the switches that I ended up buying to be able to do this repair. Of course, also, if I only had the remote control to be able to control things on here, you know, that remote could get lost, and that would also be annoying, not being able to, you know, control things again. So all in all, I'm really happy with how this project turned out. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed following along with this video, and thanks for watching.